Welcome to The Explainer. Sometimes the best way to understand a massive historical event is to zoom in, way in. Today, we're doing just that. We're telling one family's story, and it's this really personal look into the pressures and hopes that honestly shaped an entire generation during one of the most critical moments in history.
Okay, so picture this. It's spring, 1943. The whole world is at war, and for millions of people, even those thousands of miles from the front lines, this conflict, it wasn't just some headline in the paper. No way. The pressure of the war effort was something they lived and breathed every single day.
And that's where he made Betty and Fred Seaver. They're this young couple in Chula Vista, California, just trying to build a life together while all this chaos is swirling around them. Their story really gives us an intimate snapshot of the American home front, where these huge global anxieties played out in everyday living rooms and workplaces.
And their situation, well, it brings up the question that was on everyone's mind back then. With the world completely upside down and the future so uncertain, how do you even begin to plan for a family? How do you hold on to hope?
So let's dive in and get to know Betty and Fred. They're expecting their first child, and they're trying to navigate this incredibly personal journey right in the middle of a massive national crisis.
Amid all of this uncertainty, Betty's grandmother gives her this piece of advice. And it just perfectly captures what they were going through, doesn't it? This constant daily struggle to find just a little bit of peace while living under this huge cloud of anxiety.
And that anxiety, it absolutely stretched into their work lives. The Rohr defense plant where they both worked was basically the engine room of the war effort, a total pressure cooker with round-the-clock production demands.
Now, for Betty and Fred, contributing to the war was a huge source of pride, for sure, but it also came with this immense strain. And the challenges they faced at that plant, they really reflected the pressures on the entire home front workforce.
And this is where things get really interesting. Look at their different pressures. Betty is dealing with pregnancy fatigue, and get this, she's training the very person who's about to take her job. Talk about bittersweet, right? Meanwhile, Fred is losing his best guys to the draft and is just struggling to meet these impossible quotas with a bunch of brand new, inexperienced hires. So you see, they had totally different roles, but they were both feeling that same crushing weight of responsibility.
So, how did all that stress at work carry over into their personal lives? Well, despite the war hanging over everything, Betty and Fred really fought to carve out these little pockets of normalcy, to build a life for their growing family.
This timeline just illustrates that effort so perfectly. They made a point to mark these traditional family moments, hosting Mother's Day, going out for a rare date night, celebrating Father's Day. These weren't just calendar dates. They were little acts of defiance against all the uncertainty, a way of saying life is gonna go on.
And this quote from Fred on their date night, it just says it all. Remember, this is a time of rationing, so this small, generous act was a huge deal. It was a declaration. They weren't just celebrating an occasion, they were celebrating, as Fred said, making it this far. They were celebrating life itself.
At dinner, they really tried to keep the outside world away. They talked about baby names, painting the nursery, and Betty's cravings for pickles and ice cream. All the happy, normal stuff that expecting parents talk about.
But the war was just inescapable. Pretty soon, the conversation turned to money. With Betty about to leave her job, Fred was really worried about how he'd provide for their growing family. And hanging over everything was that unspoken fear. What if he got drafted?
And this brings us to a really crucial point. The psychological weight of the war was immense, even for those at home. It went way beyond production quotas. It dug deep into feelings of patriotism, duty, and even guilt. This all kind of comes to a head on Memorial Day. They go to a church service honoring fallen soldiers, and afterwards, Fred gets really quiet. The day just triggers this deep conflict he's feeling about his own role in the war, especially when he thinks about his family's legacy.
See, the Seaver family had this long, unbroken line of military service. His ancestors fought in the Revolution, his great-grandfather in the Civil War. His own dad felt like he'd missed his chance in World War I. This was a powerful legacy, and Fred felt like he was, in his words, breaking a family tradition.
So this forces us to ask a much bigger question, right? What does it actually mean to serve your country during a total war? Is the only meaningful service happening on a battlefield? Fred's conflict was shared by millions of people who were told their work at home was essential, but still felt the pull of a different kind of duty.
And here, Betty says exactly what he needs to hear. She completely reframes his contribution. She tells him that his tireless work keeping the factories running,
is his service. It's just a modern way of honoring that same family legacy.
Which brings us to our final theme, this quiet, everyday resilience that was the real backbone of the home front. It wasn't about big, grand gestures, it was about the simple determination to build a future, even when everything felt chaotic.
And that determination is just beautifully captured on Father's Day. The family all gets together to honor the fathers in their lives. But this year is extra special because they're celebrating Fred as a father-to-be. By now, the baby is kicking so strong that Fred can feel it, a real, tangible connection to the very future they're all fighting for.
And then comes this real emotional peak. Betty's father, Lyle, gives Fred a keepsakes box that he spent a whole month making by hand. This simple gift, it's so much more than just wood and felt. It's a symbol of acceptance, of legacy, and of this shared hope for the next generation.
And that, right there, is the main takeaway. The resilience of people like Betty and Fred, their choice to celebrate birthdays and holidays, to start a family, to just reassure each other, that was every bit as essential to the war effort as building airplanes. This was the quiet victory being won on the home front, every single day.
We're going to end with these words from Betty's father. It's like he's welcoming Fred into this whole other kind of brotherhood. It suggests that raising a family, especially then, is its own form of courageous service, a profound act of faith in a future that was still waiting to be won.